Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about the books I read in June 2020. There were some disappointments this month, but let's start off by talking about one that I absolutely loved. That was Summer by Edith Wharton. The plot of this one is a little bit of a departure from Edith Wharton's typical New York high society fare, because this book is all about a young woman living in a small town. Her name is Charity Royal. She's 17 years old. She's the unofficially adopted daughter of a lawyer and his family. Although she's never been particularly close with the family that took her in, she is very insecure about her background, who she was before she was unofficially adopted by this family, and she's also bored because she's 17 years old. So when a young architect comes into town, she is extremely interested. They do end up in an affair, which is largely casual, but of course has consequences. And by the end of the book, Charity has to make some pretty big decisions about what she wants the rest of her life to look like. While this was a different kind of story than I've ever encountered in an Edith Wharton novel before, I think her skill is on full display here. First of all, I cannot go any farther without noticing just how fantastic her character names are. Charity Royal. Her choices of character names are just one of many examples of how intentionally she chose her language within her books, which I very much appreciate. There is so much to unpack within her books. She somehow made this book feel both relaxing and summery, like something you would enjoy reading in a deck chair, while it touched upon really heavy, important issues and had notes of tragedy. I don't know how you do that at the exact same time, but she did. It just goes to show how brilliant of a writer she was. I absolutely love Edith Wharton. I love her books. I am joining the fan club. Get me a sticker. I'll wear it everywhere. I am so excited that there are so many Edith Wharton novels and short stories and poetry left for me to read. 5 stars to this one, and I'm assuming I'll be giving 5 stars to a whole lot more of her books. Another book I picked up during the month of June that has a real feel of summer is, of course, Summer World by Bernd Heinrich. This is a natural history book that looks at basically what happens as we move into the summer months. He essentially talks about the transitions that wild animals and plants undergo as we move into the summer months so that they can take full advantage of the longer days, of the energy from the sun, so that they can use their time wisely to reproduce, but also to prepare for the upcoming winter. I have also read his book Winter World, which is basically the same kind of book, but it's talking about animal and plant adaptations that allow them to survive the winter. And one thing I found I really like about his books from what I've read so far is that he presents information in a really interesting and really digestible way. For example, in this book, he's talking about how leaves on plants are essentially solar panels absorbing energy from the sun. And that's something I always intuitively knew, but to hear it laid out like that, I thought it was just such a cool way of looking at it. But Summer World is a lot like Winter World, not just in subject, but also in the fact that Bernd Heinrich insists on including so many of his own personal anecdotes. And I even like personal anecdotes in the natural histories that I read, but he includes just so many. But beyond that, this was very enjoyable. It felt so much like summer. It was absolutely perfect for the transition from the cooler weather in May to the warmer weather in June. I read a lot of this out in the sun, and it was delightful. A new release I picked up this month was Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein. I received this one unsolicited on NetGalley. This is the story of a former Olympic hopeful gymnast whose dreams of Olympic gold were dashed when she injured herself during a floor routine at the Olympic trials. Years later, she is without a career, and she is also without a boyfriend after her long-term football-playing boyfriend breaks up with her. She decides to move back home, in with her parents, to figure out what she wants to do in this next phase of her life. She receives an offer from a former fellow gymnast and also a former crush to help coach another Olympic hopeful gymnast. Throughout this book, our main character is considering a romantic relationship with this former crush. She is still dealing with the lingering disappointment that she didn't get to achieve her dreams while she's trying to be a good coach and help someone else achieve hers. She's also still feeling the after effects of the abusive methods that her former coach from back in the day used to use on her. She's trying to keep that in mind as she figures out what kind of a coach she wants to be, but then it's bringing it all up for her again. And then on top of everything else, a scandal breaks out across the gymnastics community. This book tried to do just way too much. With all of those different topics of focus, no one thing got the proper amount of attention. And there are some serious topics brought up in this book, things that deserved to really be discussed and focused on. The gymnastics element was interesting. I love gymnastics, so it was really cool to be in that world, to be in the gym with them. But you could definitely tell that this author was never a gymnast herself. She definitely did her research, but that comes across in just name dropping of moves. She's telling you what these moves are called and what they are in kind of the strictest sense, but she's not really telling you what they look like, or better yet, what they feel like, which she would know if she was a gymnast. So it was a pretty classic violation of show, don't tell. So this was decent. It was fun at the very least, but not necessarily something I feel inclined to shout about. My 5-star nonfiction prediction performed much better. That was The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. This is a so-called biography of cancer that takes us from the very early mentions of it in ancient times all the way up through our modern understandings of it and treatments for it. I found so much of this incredibly fascinating, and I really like the presentation of everything in here as well. The early and middle sections were probably of the most interest to me, where he's talking about how science figured out what cancer was precisely, and also how the famous treatments, particularly chemo and radiation, were first tested and then used to fight cancer. Unsurprisingly, this one got very heavy on the science, especially toward the end when he was talking about a lot of the more modern medical treatments for it. And though I probably should have considered going to med school when I was younger, considering how much this stuff fascinates me, I do not actually have a med degree. So a lot of this went over my head. Pretty much exclusively for that reason, I gave this one 4 stars instead of 5. Next, I spontaneously decided to pick up Dirt by Bill Buford when I saw that the library had a copy available. This is from the author of Heat, a food memoir that I read a few years ago. His book Heat covered his entry into the food world and also talked about how he traveled to Italy for a period of time to learn how to cook Italian food. Well, Dirt does a very similar kind of thing, only this time it's French food. It is my understanding of the food world that being a French-trained chef is something revered, but also vaguely mysterious. You speak in hushed, reverent tones when you say someone is French-trained. It is very serious. I think French training has such an allure because it is so rigorous, and also because it takes years. Many years. You could spend a whole year in a French kitchen just peeling carrots before you're allowed to do anything else. But of course, Bill Buford wanted to skip all of that and get a crash course. So first he works at a French kitchen in Washington, D.C. before making the very drastic decision to pack up his whole family and move to the culinary capital of France, Lyon. I really enjoyed the early parts of this. I think the author is a good writer. I find him funny. I really like his self-deprecating humor. And I also really liked learning more about what it means to be French trained. I watch a lot of food-related programs, I read a lot of food-related books, and I still have never heard a definition of French training. I've never really heard it spoken about in depth, except in those hushed, reverent tones. So that was nice. But reading about just how abusive the behavior in French kitchens can be was really hard to take, and I'm assuming I only got a very small sampling of it. And keep in mind, I am someone who has read Kitchen Confidential, a number of other food memoirs, and I'm a Gordon Ramsay fan. Just to put that in perspective. So there was that, plus the fact that this book is about 100 pages too long. Just when it seemed like everything was concluding very nicely, I discovered that I had about 100 pages left ahead of me. That is so annoying. It is also very annoying that he insisted on breaking the fourth wall. There is one situation that he tells you, as the reader, straight up, that he participated in because he knew he was writing a book about this whole experience. And he wanted that story to appear in the book he was writing. And he discusses all of this at length in the book itself. It came across as very smug. I did not like it. I really liked Heat, but this one, in my opinion, is missable. I also really didn't care for Enchanted Islands by Alison Amend. This book is pitched as the story of 2 friends who reconnect after a long period of being estranged. And then there's something about the Galapagos Islands and investigating Germans who are living there. But the synopsis completely misses that those 2 very disparate stories within this book read like two different books put in one place. The first half of this book is the story of our main character and her friend. How they grew up together, how they were friends, how they became estranged, and eventually how they came back together. But then, halfway through the book, we're told that our main character is being sent on a mission to the Galapagos Islands, right after she reconciled with her friend. What did all that build-up matter if she's going to leave right after they reconcile? The only thing that kept me from DNFing this book was the fact that her writing is so adept and it was so enjoyable to read, but the story was such a complete mess that it ended up overshadowing that, which is such a shame. I know that she based this off of a true story, so I don't know if she was just trying to be really faithful to what actually happened, but at this point, I wish she would have taken more liberties with the truth if it would have made for a better story. I also read the first book in the 9 Realms series, A Queen in Hiding by Sarah Kozlov. I'm not going to say too much about this one because I'm loosely planning on doing a review after I read all 4 books in the series, but what I can tell you is that you absolutely should not read the back of this book. It spoils 3/4 of this book. Thanks for that. Most of this book is set up in world building. It is set primarily in Weirendale, where the ruling queens are born with both distinctive cerulean blue hair and also a magical gift that reveals itself as the queen in question grows from a child into an adult. In this book, we learn that Weirendale is facing a threat from abroad. The leaders of a distant country are insisting that Weirendale is attempting to poison their populace, which is not true. But also the current queen, Cressa, suspects treason in her ranks. I am definitely interested enough to move on to the second book. I hope I still feel that way after the second book so I can do that review that I just mentioned. And then, of course, I did my yearly reread of my all-time favorite book, Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. It is always so weird to try to talk about this book in every single June wrap-up that I do, largely because this book is so personal to me. I know this book inside and out. I could probably quote very large passages of this book for you right now. I won't do that, don't worry. And I've had so many requests over the years for me to review this book, which I just absolutely cannot do. I love this book too much. There is no way I could possibly be objective about it, and I need to be able to do that if I'm reviewing something. As I said, I do read this book every single year, but I'm finding it does something a little bit different for me every year. Some years it's just a straight comfort read. Other years it's great for escapism. But this year, I was really paying attention to it, and I was acutely aware of all the subtle characterization going on and all the growth that Katie undergoes throughout this novel. I love this book more every single year, and with every single reread, I'm becoming more impressed by it. And that's why it's my favorite. Now, the final books I'm going to mention in this wrap-up, I have previously discussed elsewhere, so I will only briefly talk about them here. The first of those is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is the story of the Golden State Killer who committed his crimes in the 1970s and 1980s, and simultaneously it's the story of Michelle McNamara, an amateur detective using the internet to hopefully help solve this case. I thought the book was good, but I actually have preferred what I've seen so far of the new docuseries adaptation on HBO. I made a whole video in which I talk about the book and compare it against that series. I will link it for you in the description box below and up in the cards if you would like to see it. I also talked about 3 different sports-related nonfiction books in my very first piece for the Christian Science Monitor. I spoke about A Most Beautiful Thing by Arshay Cooper, the story of the first all-black high school rowing team, Splash by Howard Means, and Lou Gehrig, The Lost Memoir by Alan D. Gaff, which contains the collected and completed newspaper columns written by the baseball legend in the 1920s. I will link that roundup piece down in the description box below if you would like to read more about any or all of these books. I also read Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson for the first time this month. I actually compared this book against its Wishbone adaptation in my latest installment of What's the Story, Wishbone? If you missed that video, I will link it for you down below. And finally, I did a review of The Story of More, the latest release from Lab Girl author Hope Jahren, all about how we got to this point in the climate change saga and what changes we all can make to ensure that we have a different ending to that story. If you would like to hear more of my thoughts, I will link my full review down in the description box below and up in the cards. So those were all the books that I read in June 2020. As always, I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard of any of these books, or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me discuss them. You can put that or any other more general comments or questions you may have down in the comment section below. But if you would prefer to reach out to me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.